left Christians subject to intense persecution and even genocide.
Good morning, Madam Secretary. My name is Virginia Bunninghoff. I work in IIP in the Office of European Affairs, and I have a question on our foreign policy, if I may. Regarding the atrocities that happened in the beginning of the 20th century that some would label the Armenian Genocide, I am wondering why it is that we do not recognize it as such, and if it has to do with our classification of what a genocide is, or more to do with our relationship with Turkey.
Well, first, one of our great strengths is we do not criminalize speech. I think it's fair to say that this has always been viewed, and I think properly so, as a matter of historical debate and conclusions rather than political. The issue is a very emotional one. I recognize that, and I have great sympathy for those who are just so incredibly passionate about it. But I think the free market of ideas are the proper fora for this kind of engagement, and that's where I hope it is worked out. And eventually, people will have their own conclusions, which needs to be respected, but we need to encourage anyone on any side of any contentious historical debate to get out into the marketplace of ideas, muster your evidence, put forth your arguments, and be willing to engage, and that's what I think should happen on that too.
A genocide was committed against the Armenian people in the early part of the last century, and it should never be forgotten. The Bible tells me as a Christian to mourn with those who mourn and grieve with those who grieve. And so we do today in recognizing that fact. And the families and the loved ones of victims of those terrible events that began more than 90 years ago have my heartfelt condolences.
Madam Secretary, welcome.
Thank you.
And I want to join my colleagues in thanking you for your extraordinary service to the country at a time when the Middle East is in turmoil. We have a succession going on in North Korea, new challenges from Iran, rising leadership from China. Having your steady hand at the tiller of the ship of state is a great comfort to all of us. We were enormously proud of the very strong remarks you made on the Syrian crisis, and well-deserved criticism you leveled at Russia and China for their complicity in the ongoing violence. But set against this stellar record of achievement are some actions that were taken by you and the administration with regard to the Armenian Genocide that are of great concern. I can't begin to express in mere words how much anguish has been caused in the Armenian American community and among many human rights activists about recent statements at a State Department town hall that you made. In 1951, while the experience of the Holocaust was still tragically fresh, the United States issued this statement at the International Court of Justice. It was the statement of the United States government on the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, and it said, "The Roman persecution of the Christians, the Turkish massacres of Armenians, the extermination of millions of Jews and Poles by the Nazis are outstanding examples of the crime of genocide." Again, in the 1980s, President Reagan recognized the Armenian Genocide, as did the Congress. And as recently as just a few years ago, both U.S. Senator and our President as Senator spoke unequivocally of the Armenian Genocide. Your comments were very powerful. The horrible events perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire against Armenians constitute a clear case of genocide, you said. Our common morality and our nation's credibility as a voice for human rights challenge us to ensure that the Armenian Genocide be recognized and remembered by the Congress and the President of the United States. But last month, you made some very different statements and said, I think it's fair to say that this has always been viewed, and I think properly so, as a matter of historical debate and conclusions rather than political. And I think that this is the right posture for the U.S. government to be in, because whatever the terrible event might be, or the high emotions that it represents to try to use government power to resolve historical issues, I think, opens a door that is very dangerous to go through. This is tragically very much the line of the Turkish government. And many in the Armenian community are wondering how we could go from such a powerful position in the state Senate, such a powerful position that we took decades ago before the International Court of Justice, the powerful voice that President Reagan brought to this issue, to where we were last month. And I want to ask you, is there any question that you have that the facts of that tragic period between 1915 and 1923 constitute genocide? Do you have any different view on the subject now than you did as a U.S. Senator?
Well, Congressman, you quoted something that I said in response to a question about France trying to criminalize speech about this terrible event in history. And I do think criminalizing speech is a dangerous path to go down. And in fact, as I understand it, the French courts just declared that law unconstitutional under the French Constitution. So let me be very clear. The United States recognizes the events of 1915 as one of the worst atrocities of the 20th century. And every April 24th, the President honors the victims and expresses American solidarity with the Armenian people. And the President has said in his Remembrance Day statements that the achievement of a full, frank, and just acknowledgement of the facts of what happened is in everyone's interest. He's also said that the best way to advance that goal is for the Armenian and Turkish people to address the facts of the past as a part of their effort to move forward. And President Obama, like presidents before him, strongly supports the efforts of Turkey and Armenia to normalize their bilateral relations. So we believe that this is a position that fully reflects the terrible events of 1915, but also is aimed at trying to create a climate in which these two peoples and nations can move forward together.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to run out of time. And no one is correlating with a position against criminalizing speech in this country. No one is advocating that.
But that's what the answer you quoted from was responding to in terms of the question, Congressman. So I just want to make the record straight.
Madam Secretary, I want to keep the record straight, too. Your answer went well beyond whether it should be criminalized. Your answer said this is a matter of historical debate. And that is what is causing so much anguish in the community. And it's not just anguish. There is a very concrete injury, which we saw last week with a tragic Ninth Circuit decision that said that the victims of genocide cannot bring claims for relief under California law because it is preempted by a federal position of non-recognition of the genocide. So let me ask one last question. Is it the position of the State Department that states should be prevented from allowing redress to victims of genocide? Is there a federal policy to preempt insurance claims that victims might bring in states for relief that have suffered as a result of genocide?
Well, I'll take that for the record, Congressman. I'm well aware of the Ninth Circuit decision, and I can only reiterate and underscore that it is certainly the policy of this administration that there has to be steps taken between the Armenian and Turkish people and between the two governments, between them as to how to create a peaceful, productive, prosperous relationship. And that is, in our view, a very important goal to bring about the normalization of relations for future generations of Armenians and Turks.
I have to go on to Mr. Cole now. Mr. Cole.
Condolences. I do not minimize or deny the horror of what took place, neither do I accept the contention that those who were lost were collateral damage. The fact that more than 1 million Christians were killed makes the loss even more personal to me. In recent times, U.S. presidents have annually remembered the Armenian Genocide. President Obama noted last April that it was, quote, one of the great atrocities of the 20th century, and I associate myself with those comments. Now, while we should never forget this genocide and the lives that were lost, and the lives that are still marred to this day, I sadly cannot support this resolution. The old book also tells us that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. And I would submit with great humility that now is not the time for this committee or the American Congress to take up the measure that is before us. As you are aware, Mr. Chairman, more well aware than I am from your experience, as the ranking member has said, Turkey is a strategic partner in our ongoing efforts.
We're a humanitarian nation, but the legacy of the Obama-Clinton interventions will be weakness, confusion, and disarray, a mess. We've made the Middle East more unstable and chaotic than ever before. We left Christians subject to intense persecution and even genocide. We have done nothing to help the Christians, nothing. And we should always be ashamed for that lack of action. Our actions in Iraq, Libya, and Syria have helped unleash ISIS. And we're in a war against radical Islam, but President Obama won't even name the enemy. And unless you name the enemy, you will never, ever solve the problem. We are going to protect Christianity, and if you look what's going on throughout the world, you look at Syria, where if you're Christian, they're chopping off heads. You look at the different places, and Christianity, it's under siege.
And you know, very sadly, if they're Christian, they don't come in. Okay? If they're Christian, they don't come in. And before this whole mess, if you were in Syria 2, 3, 4 years ago, one of the top experts told me this on borders and on the military. I mean, this is a real guy that really understands what's going on. He said, you know, Mr. Trump, first time I heard it, he said, if you're from Syria and if you're Muslim, it's very easy to come into the United States, one of the easier places. But if you're from Syria and if you're Christian, it's almost impossible to come into the United States. One of the hardest things to do. I never forgot it. That was 3 years ago, he told me, 3.5 years ago. I never forgot what he said. Because Christianity is under siege, folks. Whether you want to hear it or not, it's under siege. And we've got to reverse it. But if you were from Syria 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, you wanted to come into this country, if you were Christian, one of the hardest places on earth to come into the United States was a Syrian who happened to be Christian. Something wrong. And they're the ones that really needed the protection more than anybody else. It's all going to change. It's all going to change.
Most eyewitnesses to these atrocities are dead, but we track down a few that are still alive. As a young girl hiding in a neighbour's house, Araksi Falekian saw the Turks brutally murdering the young men from her village. She was saved by a sympathetic Turkish neighbour.
Perin yesal çocuğum ama herkes kahasını gör çocuk nerene. Amem kan herkes kahasını. Uremen Perere şişeri asbest şişeri askerinin gıkoten gör asbest boran sama boralı bak pançika askerinin gıkoten bugün de neden gör gıkoten das neyin katı da sartlarıp köreren hangi bir das neyin kadar lurişpenin sıktörü gızezen gör askerinin meymek askerinin körgenen gör gıbora sıktörü gıçartsını ya meci cezasını şat çarçaran köp tıkakları pannemeye çıkılıyordu. Yes, aynaden pakaceye değme indanikime ama dacıgindanik meçineyi bahvat. Ha, inçine ma pakarım mamasını. Aynaden çorsik tarikan gaye yegaceye. Ha, panoramar herkes kahasını gör. Ha.
Araxi is still traumatized by the madness and slaughter that ensued in the town of Adana.
Yere kor kişer asil baronin. Yere kor kişer gragi meçen tışlamın sürükün takı turten. Çinçesin ayı yekrin yere sen ayrın gıvazya mezzo Adana'yın zobu. Adana'yın.
But for the Armenians, the nightmare was just beginning. After the initial massacres, the survivors were then ordered to the Syrian desert in death marches.
Tell me about Constantinople.
It can be magical. In the Grand Bazaar, you could buy the finest fashions from Paris and London, the latest automobiles from America. It can be horrible, too, just like any great city.
Were you happy there?
It was a different life.
A toast to old friends and new.
Christopher Myers.
Chris is a star reporter for the Associated Press.
May I introduce Mademoiselle Annikasari?
You're going to become a doctor.
I hear a French accent.
I lived in Paris for many years, but I'm a proud Armenian. Mikhail, you make me feel I've come home.
These Germans want your Sultan to declare holy war.
Oh my God, what was that?
It's very dangerous for Armenians right now. This is our opportunity. We will restore the great Ottoman Empire.
We cannot be here. We must leave.
What is the Associated Press doing here, Mr. Myers?
Reporting on the war.
There is no war here. Merely the evacuation of the civilian population to a safer region.
You are using this so-called relocation as a cover.
You trust no one. I have to get us out of here before there's no time left.
He wants us to help his family escape. We have to help them.
I'm a witness to history. How wonderful it must be to go back to the comfort of your American home and write about it.
We will make a stand, but we'll fight them from every rock.
Our revenge will be to survive.